Okay, everybody, good morning. My name is Caroline Baum. For those of you that haven't met me or don't know me, I am the ambassador for the Older Women's Network in New South Wales, so it's lovely to be here. And I am also here as a carer. My 94-year-old mother lives at home with me, and elder abuse has been on my radar for about 5 years, and I'm really glad to see that it's getting more attention, but there is a lot more work that needs to be done. So it's great to see so many of you here, very encouraging and very positive, and we're really grateful that you chose to come this morning. And thank you also, this is a COVID-safe environment, for wearing your masks while you're here. We've kept numbers fairly limited to keep to a kind of optimal safety level, because we want you all to leave feeling as well as when you arrived. My first duty this morning, my first pleasure this morning actually, is to introduce you to Tony Smith, who is going to do the Welcome to Country. And Tony is the principal Aboriginal health worker in the Domestic Violence Strategy Unit at Sydney Local Health District. So good morning and welcome, Tony.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, my name's Tony Smith, and I'm the principal female Aboriginal health worker across the Sydney Local Health District, the only Aboriginal worker in the violence and neglect space at the moment, with hopes of recruiting more of us. Today I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Gadigal land. Gadigal is one of the 29 clans of the Eora Nation. The Sydney Local Health District covers the Gadigal people, the Wongal people and the Bediagal people. I'm a Gadigal-born, proud Aboriginal woman. My grandmother came up from Bega, Ewan Nation, to Redfern in the early 1900s. I stayed here, and this park, this land I'm actually on today, was one of my stomping grounds as a child in the 60s growing up. I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal ancestors and the ancestors of all our nations who are the true custodians of this land. They've cared for this land for over 60,000 years, the waterways and the air. I would like to extend that acknowledgement to all our elders, past, present and for the future, and say welcome to any Aboriginal people in the forum today, and also my non-Aboriginal brothers and sisters here. Enjoy the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. It's great to have you with us, and it's great to have that sense of your history in this place as part of that story. Thank you very much. Now, we are, I should just remind you all, we are here to discuss a difficult and sensitive and painful subject. So if at any stage the issues that we're raising today make you feel uncomfortable, we can provide support. And if you feel that you need to leave the room at any stage just to get some air and process what you're hearing, that of course is absolutely fine. We can also provide debriefing support for you afterwards. I'd like to think that we can create a safe space here, and that there is no room in this room for shame in raising anything. Now, also, just a little bit of housekeeping. We are videoing this event. So if you don't want to be seen in the video, if you want to ask a question but you don't want to be seen asking a question, or you just don't want to be seen in the video, this is the side of the room to sit on. This side of the room will not be filmed. Now, if you are here because you're concerned about elder abuse, you are not alone. The stats are proof. In the year 2020 to 2021, the Elder Abuse Helpline received over 13,000 calls, and that disturbingly is a 25% increase on the previous year. Now, it may well be that that increase is partly due to an increased awareness, which means increased reporting, but it is still a very alarming figure. And of course, COVID made the problem worse. Older people found themselves trapped, isolated, unable to leave their homes, and with limited access to other people except online. Which brings me to a question I'd just like to ask you, if you wouldn't mind raising your hand, if you're really comfortable accessing services online, and if you do use online sites for information and support generally. How many of you use your computers quite a lot for information and for connecting with services. Okay, so that's about half of you. Thank you. So yes, even without the pandemic, the numbers are shocking and the problem is not going away. But the good news is that there's an awareness campaign coming, which is a joint initiative of the Older Women's Network and OPAN, which is going to really raise the profile of the issue, we hope, with politicians and with policymakers. And hopefully that will also mean more funding and more resources. Now, last year we ran this session for aged care workers and professionals in the sector, and it worked so well that we wanted to offer it to you once it was safe to do that face-to-face. So we've basically, the panel that you see here, we've basically got the band back together again. Before I introduce the panel to you, we've got a film to watch, which was made to illustrate the issue that we're here to talk about. It's a made-up case study acted by one of the actors in the Older Women's Network theatre group, and we're going to hear a little bit more from them later on this morning. The words that you hear in the film are taken from statements that were given to a social worker in real life, in a scenario just like this one. So if we would like to now play Marguerite's story, we will then have a discussion flowing on from that film. Thank you.
I've lived in my own house for 65 years now. I've been alone since my husband passed away 10 years ago. I'll be 83 this year. And I've been managing, but just some aches and pains, but managing. About 6 months ago, my grandson, he came to live with me. He said he needed a place to stay for a few weeks. And I said, of course, that's what we're here for, isn't it, family? That's what families do. He said he'd just stay for a few weeks, but he hasn't left yet. I don't want to complain, but I'm on a pension. It's a bit hard. He doesn't pay for anything, and I don't really want to ask him for money, so I buy the groceries. And I'm finding that hard to manage. I need to pay the bills and feed the two of us, you know. It is hard. I don't want to complain or make a fuss, but Michael scares me. I don't know where he gets his temper from, his nasty temper. It's definitely not from my side of the family. He gets angry so quick, you know. I get frightened when he gets mad. He's been in jail before. And you know he's my grandson. I don't want to get him into trouble with the law. And I don't want to say this, but it's hard. Things are not getting any better. I worry a lot. Sometimes he comes home in a really bad mood and he yells at me. He says I moved his stuff around, or I haven't washed his shirts, or I haven't ironed his shirts properly. I do try very hard, you know. He's my grandson. But there's always something I don't do right. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm just too old. I really don't want to complain, but I have to be so careful. I don't know what I do which sets him off. He pushed me over once before. I didn't know what to do. I'm not very strong, so I just fell over. And he laughed at me, and that hurt me a lot. I asked myself, what did I do to deserve this? And he didn't even help me to get up. I can't do anything about him. It keeps me awake at night. I'm really not feeling right. My health hasn't been good lately. My heart's not good, and my legs are not good. And I don't know how long my pacemaker's going to last. I'm really not good. It's just that my house is not my house anymore. He's there, and I don't know when he's going to shout at me. If I want to talk to my daughter, I have to take my phone into the bathroom so he doesn't hear. I know I'm old enough for one of those home care packages. In fact, I got one. But Michael says he's my carer. Can you believe this? He said I don't need a stranger coming into the house. He doesn't want anyone interfering in my life, he said. I can't talk to anyone about this. He's my grandson, you know. I don't want to get him into trouble.
Well, I don't know if that sounds familiar and how many of you can relate to that, but that is an absolutely classic example of what we're here to talk about. And so if anybody's got anything that they want to say about the film, about how the film made them feel, or whether that's a scenario that you can imagine or you can't imagine in your own circumstances, anybody, if you've got something that you'd like to say, or you might like to wait until we're a little bit further into the discussion with the panel. So I might ask you, Stephen, if you'd like to come and jump up and join us, and I'll introduce everybody else. So the first speaker that we've got today is sitting immediately to my left, and that's Kerry, who is the manager of the Aging and Disability Helpline at the Aging and Disability Commission. They have a really excellent website, which even if you're not in direct and immediate need, I really recommend that you have a look at some of their resources if you want to learn more about elder abuse. So, Kerry, I just wondered, first of all, good morning. It's lovely to have you here. How you define elder abuse, and what at the moment is the most common form of elder abuse that you're seeing?
So, essentially, elder abuse, or the abuse of older people, it's quite a broad definition. But realistically, it's any act, and interestingly, failure to act, which is to respond to a situation or provide care, for example, that might cause you harm or distress. So a lot of people tend to think that it has to be really severe and that we are talking about physical abuse, but it's not. It is so much more. It's very broad and goes right down to the essence of being respected and feeling safe in your own home.
So are there any warning signs that you can look for that are sort of early indicators that elder abuse might be about to take place?
There's a lot. Look, I can even use the example that we just watched. Often there is a change within the family circumstance. You may have a partner that has passed away in the last little while. And it's quite often that you may have another family member who steps in and lives with you, which is great if it's working out well. But when that power balance might change, then that's when it can become not okay. People start to look at your finances, controlling your finances. The other thing is often if your physical well-being changes, you've gone into hospital, for example, and you're leaving hospital, your care needs are higher. Often that dependency on somebody else can put you in a vulnerable position when you rely on that person who maybe isn't doing the right thing by you, yet you're reliant on them. It's a really hard situation for you to be in and know how to get out of and what your rights are at times.
And is the Aging and Disability Helpline the first port of call?
It doesn't have to be. The answer is it can be. My advice would be speak to somebody who you trust about what's happening for you. If you don't get help there, then you go to somebody else you trust. You are welcome to call us. You don't have to be in the depths of serious abuse to call us. We're also there to help people recognise what's happening, people who are at risk. If you've got some warning kind of things just don't feel right, and we all get that kind of gut feeling, this just doesn't feel right. You can call us. We'll talk to you about what might you do to put some strategies in place. So in this example of this video, if we received this call earlier, we may have been able to talk to Marguerite about how do you keep your independence in this situation? What can you put in place? How do you manage your own money? How do you make sure that you get services in? It's all about empowering you to continue to make your own decisions.
Okay, well, we're going to explore that a lot more with the rest of the panel, so I'd like to introduce everybody else. So from on my left, on my extreme left, we've got Fiona Tate, who's the mediator and caseworker from Relationships Australia, and sitting next to her, we've got Sharita Shanmuganathan, who's the Multicultural Access Project Officer at the Ethnic Community Services Cooperative. And then obviously next to me on my right, I've got Sergeant Stephen Dewberry from the Domestic Violence Team for Inner West Police Area Command. And then over on the other side of the divide there, I've got Nicole Pryor. Nicole, do you want to just identify yourself? Thank you. Who's the Domestic Violence Workforce Project Manager for Sydney Local Health District. Chris McCabe, advocate and educator from Senior Rights Service. And who have I not mentioned? I've got Tony, and I've also got Helen. Helen. I do not have... Helen, would you like to introduce yourself?
So my name's Helen Hislop. I'm a Community Services Manager at Sydney Local Health District as well, looking after a few different teams in aged care.
Thank you, and welcome. So I guess... Ooh, my microphone's just gone. Quick, switcheroo. Maybe you can fix that, Stephen. I don't know, used to be a plumber before he was a policeman, I don't know. I had to get that in somewhere. I suppose what I'd like to start with each of you saying something about, maybe we'll start with you, Nicole. How can your service or your organisation help a woman in a situation like Marguerite? So having looked at that particular scenario, wow, where would you go?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Caroline. So Sydney Local Health District provides a range of different care and support options for older people. So ranging from the care that someone can receive, like Marguerite, in hospital, through to outpatient clinics and a range of different community treatments and support, like assessment and case management and support services in the community. So all New South Wales health workers have a responsibility to identify and respond to abuse of older people. So this means that if Marguerite was to receive care or treatment from a Sydney Local Health District employee, and she told that health worker, so whether that's her doctor or a social worker, a physio, an occupational therapist, counsellor or a community service, so if she was to tell them about her grandson, or if that particular worker suspected some mistreatment themselves, then that worker would have a responsibility to either support Marguerite or to refer on to a skilled worker or service that had the expertise to be able to support her around elder abuse. So let's just say that Marguerite came into hospital and she told a worker there about her grandson, or the worker picked up that there was some concerns around possible abuse at home. So this would actually trigger a referral with her consent, to see a social worker. And so that social worker would be really providing information to Marguerite and working with her to explore what options she has available. And this, could be that she is supported with a referral to Senior Rights Service for some legal advice. It might mean financial support, so getting some financial support for her. It might be some support to make a report to the police and to potentially access an ADVO, a protection order. It could be that, we look at some counselling or some psychological support or some mediation, or looking at community supports on discharge from hospital. So the first national prevalence study into abuse of older people, which was released in December, showed us that we found that older people are at higher risk of abuse if they're isolated at home or potentially dependent on other people for care, particularly an abuser themselves, or where there's like high levels of carers' stress at home. So sometimes we know that just getting a general community service in to support around perhaps shopping or housework or someone regularly coming into the home can mean that we have some eyes into the home, some potential monitoring of the situation, and we know that that can sometimes decrease isolation. And we know that abusers use isolation as a tactic to allow for further abuse to happen by the older person being isolated. And so having services can decrease that isolation. It can decrease levels of carer stress and dependency, and sometimes be enough to decrease the risk of abuse or potentially even stop it from occurring. So I might just pass you on to Helen here to tell us a little bit about what general support services are available to older people in our area.
Thanks, Nicole. So the teams that I look after have a lot to do with those practical supports coming into people's home. And a lot of that is provided through the My Aged Care that you might have heard of, which is Commonwealth-funded services for older people. And so getting into those services involves having an assessment. So someone from my teams coming out and having a chat through how things are working at home and where support might be needed. And that can be a broad range of support. You know, as Nicole alluded to, it might be as simple as someone coming in once a week to do some cleaning, or it could be somebody coming in to somebody with very high care needs almost daily. So the support is very varied that you can access through that system. But it might be just enough to reduce that risk of abuse by taking some of the carer stress away, or also having somebody just in the home and about. So our teams can look after that in Sydney Local Health District, help people get into the system, as well as providing some of those supports. So we also have teams of, physiotherapists, occupational therapists who can come out to the home and help offer services for people to improve mobility, but also contribute to that safety aspect. And as Nicole's alluded to, all of our staff are aware of elder abuse. They know what they're looking for. And sometimes building that relationship with a person might mean that they actually feel comfortable to talk about it to somebody. So just having that consistent worker in the home can also help with managing an abusive situation.
Can I just ask a question following on from that, Helen? So do you have an idea of how much time you can give to a person as an individual when they come to you with this problem? If they're not going to consent to taking matters further, if there's resistance because they feel ashamed or embarrassed, or it's a very, very difficult thing, isn't it? Particularly when it involves a close member of your family. So on average, how much time can you spend on a case?
So in terms of how much time, it's very individualised. So if we took someone like Marguerite, for example, so Marguerite mentioned about having aches and pains. So I could explore, okay, well, could a physiotherapist and a regular exercise program help with that? So I might be able to get some support through there. She mentioned how it felt to me like she was doing all the cooking and all the shopping and looking after all of those tasks for herself and her grandson. So it might be a case of saying, well, actually, do we need someone in to do the shopping for you? Is that becoming too difficult? So it's really a case of sitting down with the person and working it through. So I would say I don't walk into a situation and say, you've got 3 hours of my time and that's it, then you're done. It's very individualised, and our staff spend the time to talk through with people to figure that out, so we find something that works for that person as an individual.
That's great. I want to ask you, Sharita, let's just imagine for a moment that Marguerite's first language is not English, which puts an additional kind of degree of difficulty into the mix. So can you give us a little bit of a sense of what happens to Marguerite then?
Sure, okay. So I am from a service provider point of view that I'm going to give, as well as a cultural point of view. So service provider is, I guess, once you've been assessed.
Off.
Oh, mask off.
Sorry, Sharita.
Sorry. Okay, so this is once you've been assessed and you've got those services coming to your home. So again, we're talking about people that might help you with your shopping or might help you with domestic help at home or even your gardening. Because we are talking about maybe someone that doesn't speak English as a first language, there are a lot of bicultural workers out there as well that speak both languages. In the inner west, we are so diverse, and services around this area also have that staffing that's very, very diverse. So in our organisation, we've got over, I think, 35 languages that are spoken by just staff alone, which really helps, because I guess as someone receiving that service, you can ask for someone of the same culture or that might speak the same language, or you can also get maybe a different culture that you can identify with. It's not just a straight answer. There is, of course, as well, interpreters that we can use. This is really, really important, especially in these scenarios, because when it comes to families and roles and cultural aspects put into it, a lot of the times I think you kind of think, oh, my daughter will interpret for me, or my family member, or there's someone that you know personally that you think, oh, they'll be able to say what I'm feeling. You know what? They want to hear your voice. We want to hear what you have to say. Don't be restrained. Like I would actually encourage you strongly to get an interpreter if that's what's required, so that you can speak freely and honestly about how you're feeling. And a lot of the times it can be quite grey how you're feeling. It might not be really clear that it is right, or or what you're trying to communicate might not be clear, because there's so many levels of belief systems in there, stigmas, how you think, your role, gender roles. So many things come into play, and it's almost sometimes you've got to unpack that, and that's not easy. It's really not an easy thing to do. I think, again, with language, as migrants, we've come here for a better life, and then we find ourselves sometimes in a position where it's not so great, and that really adds more complications on top of things. But what I can assure you is that the staff, now than ever, are being trained. They're being, we're talking about elder abuse. We're talking about these different things more than we ever have, which is great, because it's freeing. And I guess the biggest thing is I can encourage you to speak out, to talk, to ask. Even if it's not clear in your head, that's okay. Bounce off these ideas. We've got staff that are trained, that want to help. We've got these amazing panel members that will, no, don't worry, that will be able to clarify things and help put things on the right pathway. So yeah, from a cultural if you don't speak the language, there are other ways of doing it, and connecting with individuals over that. And all staff are also trained in cultural awareness. So they do understand that if you're a female and you want to talk to another female, that's okay. That's normal. It's not something to feel, I just have to go along with it. You can ask for these things that you might feel, it's a bit tricky to ask for, but be a bit brave and just say it and see what happens, if you know what I mean. It's you're not going to be judged in this space. It's recognised this is not your fault. What's going on or what's happening, it's not your fault. It's happening, and there are pathways that we can help.
Yeah, well, there are lots of cultural taboos which make it very different in terms of expectations, and culture can absolutely hold you back. So let's just, building on what you just said, Sharita, thank you. Can I just ask you, Tony, let's just imagine for a moment that Marguerite is Indigenous.
Okay, so if Marguerite was Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, a lot of the things have already been said, but the Sydney Local Health District staff are all mandatory trained in cultural awareness and respecting the difference. I could be a point of referral, as with all the other Aboriginal health workers, on maybe giving our mob a choice, our families, men, women, our families, a choice of whether they want to speak to an Aboriginal worker or be involved in an Aboriginal community-controlled organisation such as Waianga Aged Care. Financially, they could be referred to Redfern Legal Service rather than the mainstream financial services. We have a few organisations out there for counselling. We have Kinchela Boys Home now for stolen generation survivors. Across the board, it would be much the same as mainstream, but giving our people, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, a choice, as with the CALD community. There was something else I can forget. Yeah, and that'd be it. And the same as the gender roles, respecting that there is men's and women's business traditionally as a protocol, and offering that person, a male or a female worker, or someone they know from community that might work down at the hospital, is another good choice. Yeah, but mainly if they're given the choice and they have identified as being Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, giving them the choice of an Aboriginal health worker would be the main thing.
That's good to know. Thank you very much, Tony. Can I ask you, Chris, perhaps you'd like to introduce what Senior Rights Services does generally, and then talk about what you would do in terms of helping Marguerite if she contacted your service.
Okay, thank you, Caroline, and good morning, everyone. Yes, I'm with the Seniors' Rights Service, and we've been around for about 30 years. We're a non-government organisation, so it's a free service and it's confidential. Our service provides, we have a phone line and an increasing number of advocates that are around New South Wales who will be able to answer the phone from Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, to respond to people that phone us. That's the advocacy team. And the legal team is also there, and I'll tell you a little bit more about them. But in terms of making contact with the legal team, we have a new phone situation at the moment, which we hope is going to make things a lot easier. Everybody is sick to death of phoning up and being on a queue for half an hour and being told to press one of 6 different options. So when you phone us now, it will say if you are wanting to speak to somebody in relation to aged care advocacy, press 1, legal, press 2. So it can't get much more simple than that, and we're trialling that at the moment. The advocacy team basically exists to provide a service for anyone that's receiving a Commonwealth-funded aged care package, whether that be at home through the home care package or CSHP, or whether that is somebody residing in a residential aged care facility. We go in to talk to people in aged care facilities. I go and do information sessions roughly about twice a week to the residents, and I'll also do sessions with staff. The primary focus of those is to speak about the rights, the Charter of Aged Care Rights, and the fact that just because somebody's over the age of 65, you don't lose your human rights. There is a thing called the Aged Care Rights, and there's some booklets out on the table outside if any of you are interested. And I think number 2 on that list is to live a life free of abuse and neglect. So that really fits with the story of Marguerite. Marguerite wouldn't necessarily identify herself as being a victim of abuse. We don't necessarily see what's happening to us as abuse. She would know that she's distressed, she would know that she's uncomfortable, she'd know that she feels a bit trapped, but she might not necessarily think, oh, I'm being abused, I'll phone up an abuse service. So I guess many people that contact us in the realm of abuse and neglect I guess our most common would be around financial abuse. And with Marguerite, it seemed to be financial, it was emotional, psychological, and she mentioned that there was physical as well. And we still have that old myth in society, don't we, that if it's not physical, then it's not abuse, it's not violence. So I think a place like Seniors' Rights is a good place because people will often just ring up about absolutely anything. And if it's not something that we can help with, if someone rings up to say, how can I get a free, bus ride to Brisbane on my ticket, we will refer them to, a transport service. We won't be able to pick that up. But we will listen. We will, try and respond appropriately to what is going on. In the instance of Marguerite, all these other great services that people are representing around me today, we have connections with, so we will take it one step at a time. With Marguerite, it would be simply listening to her, acknowledging the difficult situation that she's in, and then we would certainly talk to her about she has the right to not put up with that, to not live with that, because she would be scared to change because it's family. We would very gently start looking at what some potential options are. One of those may be introducing aged care packages. Getting external workers into the home is often a great buffer or barrier for people who are being abused particularly by family members, which is why family members don't, like the fellow in Marguerite's story, didn't want that. They want to isolate the person. So we would look at what inroads there may be to making some connections there. We would also talk to Marguerite about our service providing legal advice. So we as advocates don't do that. We might be able to do a bit of an overview of, do you have a power of attorney? Do you have an enduring guardian? However, talking to a solicitor is where the advice comes from. So we will be able to organise to have the person receive an appointment with one of our solicitors, and that's free and confidential as well. And then referrals to any external services or working with other services would happen from that. The other thing that we do is work with, we have a navigator service. So we don't all do that, but there's somebody in Dubbo, there's someone on the South Coast, and we're just having someone start up in Newcastle, which means that that person can help somebody navigate the aged care system, which I'm sure a lot of you in this room would know is highly complex and drives us all crazy, and it changes constantly. So a navigator will help somebody from the beginning to the end of getting a service in place, sort of contacting My Aged Care, just explaining the process of how you get someone in to clean your floors or, cut the hedge or do whatever it is, need help with showering. So
that's great. That's great. I love the idea of the navigator. I think we're definitely going to need more of those. Thank you, Chris. Can I just go to Fiona to ask you for a comment for what Relationships Australia would do, how you would respond if you got a call from someone in Marguerite's situation. And do you find at Relationships Australia that you are a first point of contact for people who are perhaps feeling some sense of anxiety or dread or just a sense of fear that relationship dynamics are going a little bit off the rails?
Certainly we can be. I'm part of a service called the Let's Talk service, which is a free service offered to older people and their families. So we might get phone calls from an older person who's concerned about relationships, as you say, about the family dynamic. They may have specific concerns, or they may just be feeling a little bit anxious and call us. So we would talk to them and find out what their concerns are and how we could help. We often get calls from other family members. It might be a concerned son or daughter that's worried about another member of the family. So again, we would talk to them. And the difference, I suppose, that our service can provide, it's, as I say, a free, private and confidential service, is that we're able to work with the whole family. So although our focus is the older person if they're at risk, we can bring in the other family members for a mediation and, in a sense, shine a light on what's happening. And that can actually be really useful because, as Chris was saying, sometimes people don't understand what they're doing is abuse. And often there's opportunistic abuse. So you might have, for example, in Marguerite's case, we don't know the grandson's story. He may be under a lot of stress, he may have financial stress, he may have mental health problems, so that by bringing the family together, we can actually support all the facets of the family and provide referrals, counselling, a little bit of casework. And over the 3 years that this service has been running, we've become very involved and had got to know many of the people on the panel. We work with the ADC and we refer to them and they refer back to us, and also seniors' rights and a lot of the services that are here, the police also. So we can put a whole, I suppose that we wrap around what's happening, and if we're not the right service, then we're able to refer people quite directly and in a targeted way to services that are much better to support them than we are. But I think that's where we differ. We are able to bring everybody together and in an impartial way try and support the whole system, so, because we know that the people most likely to abuse older people are unfortunately their own children. So we need to understand why they're doing that and see if we can support them not to do that.
Thank you for that. I might come back to you on that because I think that that's a particularly interesting aspect of this. Kerry, you wanted to add something, and I promise, this man in uniform has been very, very patient. We're going to come to you. Very patient man. We're going to come to Stephen in a moment. First,
and Stephen, I think what I was going to say will very much lead into your segment. But I guess what I wanted to say is what we did see. It's not something that we should be taking lightly. And what often happens is as you get older, your situations often don't get viewed the same as others, the inherent ageism within our society. So if we look at that and make the person younger, what we're looking at is domestic violence. We've got somebody who has moved in. We've got somebody who has started to control their finances. We've got somebody who's belittling, making them feel worthless and powerless. She does not feel safe in her home. It is escalating to the point where she's now being pushed and she's saying she's fearful of him coming back home. It's not a light thing for you to be watching and going, oh, maybe we could have a chat with her. Things are escalating for her. But when it comes to our service, the Ageing and Disability Commission, we are what we call a will and preference agency. So if you are to call us, outside of if there's criminality in what you describe to us, we do have mandatory reporting with police, but we work well with them. But outside of that, it's our job to be working with you and trying to work out how do we safeguard you and what assistance will you allow us to provide and work with you on. And that's how we work moving forward. But I really wanted to encourage you to realise this is not a light topic. It's serious and we don't want to diminish it because of your age. You have exactly the same rights to be treated with respect and dignity as you age and be safe in your own home.
thank you for that reminder, Kerry, because I think, I was reading some stuff about this yesterday, and sometimes it starts with something that seems relatively innocuous, like someone might suddenly be speaking to you in a raised tone of voice, and that might generate a sense of aggression, and you might start to feel afraid in your own home. Someone might just pinch you. It starts with something small, and it often builds from something small, and the thing is to not dismiss that small thing and excuse it. Now, coming to you, Stephen, you have a domestic violence, family violence unit, but you don't have anyone, I don't think, specifically trained to deal with elder abuse in the police force in the Inner West. So if this scenario, is this scenario that we saw in the film familiar to you? And at what stage does someone like Marguerite end up coming to the police? Is it only in a situation where she has decided that she wants to press charges, or can it be much earlier than that?
Thank you. We do not have an aged care crime prevention officer in the Inner West. However, the Central Met region does have one in the eastern suburbs, so we can refer to them for expert advice. But this is a domestic violence offence that we've witnessed here. Okay, we hear Marguerite say that he pushed her and that she's living in a house with fear. Our realm is the criminal justice system. He's committed a crime. He would be prosecuted for that. We have a woman living in her own home, living in fear. We need for her to be safe. Again, we use the criminal justice system and ADVOs to protect her. It's a domestic relationship. They're blood relatives. It's domestic. The legislation says that we must, if we believe a domestic violence offence has occurred or is likely to occur, take out an AVO. In this case, we would most definitely be taking out an AVO. We would be speaking to Marguerite about what the correct conditions on that AVO are, but we would be pushing that he be excluded from that house because we need to make sure that she's safe, okay? We would go down the path of assertive investigation for the criminal offence of the assault, for the intimidation that she's experiencing. What does that mean? We'd encourage Marguerite to provide us a statement. That statement could be typed, written in a constable's notebook, or video statement, which is called our domestic violence evidence in chief, which means we sit down and we record Marguerite's statement, which gets played back to the court. It captures her emotion at the time the police are there. The one thing that's overwhelming in that video is Marguerite's repetitive statements that I don't want him to get into trouble. He needs to be held accountable for his actions. You know, that's not uncommon that a family member doesn't want another family member to get into trouble, but he needs to be held accountable. She needs to be safe and feel safe in her own home.
What happens if a victim is unwilling to report to the police? Because that does seem for many people like a very dramatic step to take, and you would hope that there were things that you could do before you got to that. So can you perhaps elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, and we accept it is very daunting to come to the police, but we do need to encourage her to do that. Hopefully before that part, other services are in place and they would be encouraging her, empowering her to come to us. We would ask, you know, if you came across that, it was another family member or a friend or a neighbour, that you might act as their support person and bring them to police or bring them there. Our phone service is fantastic. You ring a police station, you speak to a person, you ain't pushing any numbers, okay? You'll get the police. You ring 000, you'll get a person. So please, don't hesitate. Better to call and for it to be not as serious as what we think than not to call and for something to escalate. If Marguerite was to disclose some things and not everything, regardless, an incident would be created, and through our safer pathways, every victim of domestic violence is referred through the safer pathways to a support service. Okay, females go to one service, males to another. In our case, it's Relationships Australia for males. They get a phone call, that follow-up. A lot of the time in that follow-up with a person that's not a police officer, more information is disclosed. If we believe that person is a serious threat, they're referred to our safety action meetings. That's when a group of us come together, chaired by an inspector of police, to see what we can immediately do to make sure that person is safe, to remove that serious threat. Okay, in this case, Marguerite is at threat and she needs to be kept safe. And criminal charges and ADVOs would be the pathway that the police would take in that case.
So, Stephen, can I ask you though, can you elaborate also on protection orders? We talked a little bit there about an AVO. How effective are they?
Look, they're a court order. In the first instance, usually approved by a sergeant of police. that restricts a person's behaviour and movements to some extent. Do they get breached? Yes, unfortunately they do. What do the police, in part of our prevention and disruptions strategies, is that we go and re-engage with that offender to remind them that the AVO is in place. So we'll go and visit them straight face to face and discuss with them. Last week you were served with a copy in AVO. These are the conditions. Do you understand what that condition means? Do you understand there's a condition that you're not to be within 100 metres of your grandmother's home? Do you know the implications if you breach that? You will be arrested, you will be charged. There's no grey in that. It's if you breach, you're hitting the dock, okay? So that's where they are. People unfortunately do breach them because people have criminality about them and they breach them, but the police will do everything to empower it. If they're a very high-risk offender, they'll be reviewed for that and they may be managed by the police, case managed by the police, and we understand the complexities around some offending, maybe mental health, maybe drug and alcohol, maybe relationship issues. So we'll help manage them and funnel them into those services, make referrals on their behalf so they can get help for that. We want to take a preventative measure to try to stop them from reoffending.
Let's just imagine, we've already imagined a scenario where Marguerite might not be, she might come from a different cultural background, she might be from a First Nations background. So now let's add in another layer to the story and imagine that there is a level of cognitive decline and confusion in Marguerite. What happens to her then?
I guess in some ways similar, but it would also depend. I guess the main thing is we would still be trying to engage with Marguerite. As I said earlier, regardless of your cognitive capacity or your ability, we would still be trying to talk with you at whatever level might be appropriate to try and engage with what your wishes are or what your experiences are. We would then be trying to engage whoever your support person might be. Really important though for us at the Ageing and Disability Commission, when we are dealing with somebody that maybe does have dementia and doesn't have the ability to make their own decisions, the risks are a lot higher. And it's not that we take it more seriously, but I guess more of those cases are likely to go through to what we call our community support and investigations team. Because more often than not, the person who is abusive is their substitute decision maker, their carer, their guardian, the only person living with them. So their ability to actually remove themselves or act on their own behalf to make change is very limited or not existent at all. So one, we need to act quickly and work out who is within that home, how do we safeguard that person? Again, same as what we would have done before is police, but with police, we would be providing police with information that we have gained. We write written referrals with what's been told to us to enable them to respond. We might request a welfare check. We might be trying to get that person into hospital if there are no other options. We might be looking at getting them into hospital for a social admission and be working with them from there where they are safe.
Would you ask the doctor's report?
So with the Ageing and Disability Commission, we do what we call preliminary inquiries. So we might engage a doctor, we might engage, it's not uncommon for us to write to ACAT, for example, and find out what services are in place. Have those services been cancelled? Have they been given approval for services but they have never been activated, or they've been declined even though the person's care needs are very high? So yes, we do make a lot of preliminary inquiries with various clinicians and agencies.
What about if family decide to give untruthful information?
So the question from the audience was, what about if family are giving untruthful information in terms of a caseworker trying to investigate the situation?
Yeah, tricky. And I have to say, we do experience this at the Ageing and Disability Abuse Helpline. Often around sitting around a situation of abuse is family dysfunction, and often that goes a long way back. So we get multiple stories. Regardless, it is our role at the Ageing and Disability Commission to speak to you. What is your truth? What's happening for you, and what support do you need to feel safe? That's our role. So what other people are saying, we will take that into account, but you are our primary concern. And look, it's our role, and other agencies, and especially police, in this particular situation, to be asking the right questions and speaking to the right people. But whatever we focus on ensuring that you're safe, I guess that's the primary goal. It's not necessarily who's telling the truth or not. If you're feeling fearful and you need assistance, it's our role to support you.
Can I just ask, I don't know which one of you would like to answer this question, but can someone perhaps talk to the necessity to appoint a guardian in these situations sometimes if someone doesn't have someone who's already appointed? Is that something that either Nicole or maybe Chris you'd like to talk about? Anyway.
I should put my glasses on to speak. That's a bit funny, isn't it? Yes, I guess that point of often the abuser is a person that has guardianship in some way, shape or form, which is a problem. I'm just thinking of a situation at the moment that I'm involved in, and that's someone that's in an aged care facility. And what that did was, what we did in that situation with the solicitors was go to the public trustee and have an NCAT hearing around the whole situation, which I can't say any more than that at the moment. But yes, utilising legal advice on what's going to be most appropriate in any given situation, which sits alongside the whole question of consent and dementia, which is a whole other...
That happens a lot in ethnic societies. Yeah, I was wondering whether perhaps, Nicole, you would like to elaborate a bit on that issue of consent and of guardianship.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, from a health perspective, we will be working with you until we had an assessment that actually said that there was a lack of decision-making capacity in a particular decision that needed to be made. So if there was concerns around cognition, potentially early stages of dementia or a diagnosis of a cognitive impairment, then we would be wanting to be clear around individual decision-making capacity. So we might look at a referral to a geriatrician or a neuropsychologist for an assessment to be clear around your decision-making capacity. If the outcome of that assessment was that you required some support around decision-making and we had concerns or we already had a guardian in place, like we were talking about, who we had concerns about fulfilling their role, potentially, either abusing or not understanding their role as a power of attorney or guardian, then we would look at advocating or writing a report to the to NCAT for a guardianship hearing to look at getting an advocate or a decision maker appointed. So we have a team in Sydney Local Health District that does a lot of that work and can, if you're known to the district, be referred to for support around, those assessments, coordinating those assessments, writing to, doing a report to NCAT, supporting you through that hearing process.
Great. Fiona, we were talking before a little bit about the perpetrator, and I'm just in these incidences, and I'm just wondering whether you have anything that you can tell us about what you understand are the triggers that cause perpetrators of elder abuse. Because I'm just thinking, in my own situation as a carer, I have to say that I have experienced anger, resentment, frustration, exhaustion. You know, these are the realities of caring. There's no point in fantasizing about what a caring role is. Sometimes it's enormously rewarding and sometimes it's thankless. Sometimes it's a mixture of the two. So can you perhaps tell us a little bit about what causes someone to kind of cross the line, if you like, from mild irritation to what is actually abuse?
I think that's a really good point, because a lot of people are, they talk about the sandwich generation, where you've got people caring for their older family members, but they're also dealing with possibly their teenage children, and they may even be dealing with adult children having problems, and also grandchildren as well. So people are can be incredibly stretched. And I think, as we've mentioned, there are lots of different ways that people can abuse, and a lot of it is psychological, a lot of it is being unkind, being dismissive, that idea of ageism. So there are lots of things that unfortunately allow people to become perpetrators, and they probably don't even think that they're becoming abusers, but it's that idea of, as children, we're often indulged by our parents, we're looked after, we're given a lot of things. As adults, there is this kind of line where we're supposed to stop asking, and a lot of adult children forget that there's that line and they keep asking. So they might need help with finances, they might need help with accommodation, they might need to use the car. You're not using it, why don't I just take the car? And they just don't give it back. So it's really, all these things are very individual, because it's up to the older person themselves to decide sometimes what that line is. And I think that's why it's so hard sometimes for older people to report abuse, because it's a kind of can be a grey area until things become serious, that you dismiss things a little bit. You say, oh, well, they were just upset, or they're having a bad day, or lots of excuses that we hear from older people of why their adult children or grandchildren or carers are really taking advantage of them. And sometimes it can be just unpleasant, and sometimes, as we've heard, it can actually be criminal. And what we hope to do is to be able to get in early, the same as that ability to report to anyone, to stop these things happening before they get to that terrible point where it becomes very, very obvious that something terrible is happening.
I guess that if we validated the carer role socially a little bit more, carers would feel a little bit more seen and wouldn't feel so isolated in the role, because I often notice when you describe yourself as a carer socially, the shutters come down and people just don't want to hear anything about what you're doing. And so the person that you're caring for might feel isolated, but you might also be feeling pretty shitty about your status in life. I just wanted to ask you, Sharita, whether you wanted to add anything to what Fiona has said from a cultural perspective about, in a way, maybe the sort of psychological profile of someone who might tip over from mild irritation to abuse.
Yeah.
Take your mask off, though.
Sorry. Look, it's so complicated, especially, like you said, when it comes to cultural and ethnic groups. You know, they've been grown up, you know, you don't hang out your dirty washing, you do whatever it takes. You know, I've got so many cliches. I mean, I've grown up with it. You know, you work doubly as hard so that, you know, and you present a certain image. And all these conscious, unconscious biases come through.
Very big carpet.
Yes. And it's just layers upon layers. What I can assure you is that, I guess, again, we are starting to talk about these things, and we're starting to talk about it openly. I guess, you know, now, you know, we've got second generations and third generations in different cultural groups that are also coming up that are talking about the yuckiness, if I can say that, that's going on underneath. And we are starting to address these issues, and as well as, you know, like the collaborative, we all actually meet together and we talk about these issues. So even within mainstream, you know, they're very, very aware that these issues can be happening, and just, yeah. Yeah.
Well, you know that there's the help in the room to get you across that line. So you have come to the
Yes.
right place. You are in the right place today. Make the most of it. Make the most of it.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you, just Sharita, going on, elaborating a bit on what you just said, it seems to me that where some of the stress points could be is that there's been a traditional way perhaps for the parents to grow up and to have an expectation perhaps of the way generations relate to each other, and then when you migrate here and you become this kind of hybrid family where you've got Australian values that are sort of colliding with the traditional values of previous generations, that there's a complete kind of disconnect.
Clash of cultures, absolute clash of cultures. And sometimes you'll find this, you know, in the home environment, there's certain traditions and things that you follow. As soon as you leave that door, it's almost, you become a different person. And yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think what I can suggest there as well is support groups, little small networks, meeting up with friends, the essentialness of connecting with people with similar stories. You know, you are not alone. Again, we're aware of these things, they do happen. We've got pathways and channels. Support groups are great. You can share your stories and experiences. You might identify with someone in that group, hopefully, that you know, that can help unpack and make sense of it. Because I think a lot of times when you're in clashing of cultures, it's trying to make sense of it and then you trying to make the best decision for yourself on how you deal with it. Because at the end of the day, it's you. It's about you, and you are important, and no one is going to judge you. And yeah, look, even though there's shame and
Well, it's interesting that you've mentioned that. I want to pick up on something that Kerry's just scribbled a note, which I just happened to have seen, which is about a term that's a relatively new term that I think some of us are becoming familiar with increasingly, which is this expression, inheritance impatience. Would you like to perhaps say something about inheritance impatience? You know, the fact is we're all living much longer, and that has an impact on children who are expecting something to come to them.
Yeah, what we hear regularly is adult children having a sense of entitlement. And I won't ask you to raise your hand, but I can guarantee a lot of you have heard the words, my inheritance. And why wasn't that mentioned earlier, you know, when you're young? It's just this language that starts to creep in. So we see two different things. One is inheritance impatience, which is, it's going to be mine anyway, just give it to me now. And when you don't, you might start to experience other types of abuse to try and access your funds. Pardon me. And around that, you know, property prices have gone up. A lot of your generation are sitting on property. Well, again, it's been seen as their inheritance, this property, and trying to get access to it now. And there's another interesting, I shouldn't say interesting because it's a terrible word to use, but inheritance conservation. So what we're seeing, and this links a little bit back into people who may start to have dementia or some memory loss and start to rely on other family members to manage their money, is that money stops being spent on them and we start to see neglect. So we're not spending your money on your own services. We're not spending your own money on nice clothes that you would have bought before. So essentially what we're doing is we're saving your money so that it's still in the bank when you pass away. Not okay. It's your right. If you wish to give money to your children, absolutely your right. But you do not have to give it at any time, and you do not have to leave a cent to your children. We've had calls before with adult children ringing us and saying, you need to stop my mum and dad. They've gone out, this year they've gone on a cruise, they've bought a caravan, they're hardly home to look after the grandkids. We need you to stop it. Yeah. Not okay, okay? It's your right to do what you want with your money and leave it to how much you want to leave, absolutely fine. And if that's none, also fine.
Yes, I mean, we're laughing about that, but that is not funny. Helen, I know that you want to make a comment about support for carers.
Yeah, I think just in relation to your point earlier around where's that tipping point for carers between feeling angry, frustrated, etc., and it turning into abuse. And so I just wanted to flag that there are supports for carers out there that people can access, again, to try and take us away from it boiling over into abuse. So there's the Carer Gateway that's run by the Commonwealth alongside the My Aged Care system. And then we have supports within Sydney Local Health District. So, for example, we have a dementia advisor and counsellor. So Anne Tunks does work in that space for people who are caring for relatives with dementia, for example. We have things like in-home respite services, so somebody to come into the home and provide a period of support for the person with dementia, for example, so that carer can go out and get a break and kind of recharge their batteries. So I just wanted to get that in to say that carers can access support, and it's really important so we stop things from bubbling over.
Thank you. And Chris and Nicole, I just wanted to ask you about this because I was reading about this yesterday. I was looking around at what the international models are, where there are things, good ideas that we can borrow from other countries and other cultures, because every country, it seems to me, is grappling with this at the moment. Everywhere around the world, everybody's got some sort of program running to deal with elder abuse. And one of the things that I really like that they're doing in France is that the helpline services there are staffed by trained older volunteers, so they're retirees. And so what's really lovely about that is that when you call one of those helpline numbers, you're not getting someone from a different generation, you're getting someone who can relate to you age to age, which it seems to me might be a very nice way to gently kind of introduce you to the next step of the process. Could you imagine something like that happening here, or is there anything that you might like to say about the sorts of people who are on the helplines?
I might get Kerry to talk about the helpline, but I do know internationally there's different approaches, but across the board, elder abuse is an issue internationally. We know that 1 in 6 older people internationally are experiencing or exposed to abuse in the last 12 months. Different countries have different approaches. We know that in the US, it's actually mandatory to report. It is a crime. Elder abuse in itself is a crime. In the UK, it's not a mandatory report. However, there are systems for safeguarding that are well embedded into all the health and social care responses to abuse of older people. I think we're at, still in early days here in Australia. I think there is a lot of change in this space and we're moving in the right direction. There was a lot of talk at the National Elder Abuse Conference. There is a national plan to respond to abuse of older people. The first part of that plan was to look at a prevalence study to really scope out how big the problem actually was. And so that was released in December last year. And now further research needs to take place about that will inform us, particularly in the First Nations space around, we don't know enough about abuse of older people for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And so the research will also be looking at best practice in this area, so to inform the whole system approach and what that should look like to best respond to abuse of older people.
Yeah.
Also within our, in the First Nations cohort, a lot of the people your age, a lot of older persons are in the care of their grandchildren, and not just one or two, sometimes a whole household that's under-resourced and overcrowded, and it gets swept under the carpet. Of course, again, because of the deaths in custody situation at the moment. So you can just imagine what some of those grandkids are saying to their grandparents whilst abusing them in the blackmailing part
Can
of it.
I ask you, I don't know whether this is a question for Chris or for Nicole or Helen, but isn't there a collaborative scheme at local government level that's taken place between Canterbury and Bankstown, and I just wondered whether you could say something about how that's going and whether that's a model for other local government authorities that there are these collaboratives?
So obviously today's event is being held by the Inner West Region Elder Abuse Collaborative. So we're an initiative, and there are different collaboratives around the state. So we're actually an initiative from the Ageing and Disability Commission. And so we're a range of different agencies, organisations working together to locally raise awareness about abuse of older people. Yeah.
Sorry, can you just, we'll come to you in a moment. Someone just asked a question here, sorry. The user nation law, how does that affect? The inheritance impatience, euthanasia, okay. Do you want to answer that question?
I guess it's hard to know because it hasn't been come to fruition as we speak. I know there will, something we'll have to tackle when we get to that. There will be concerns, that have already been raised around the pressure of older people. All we can hope at this stage, if it does come into play, that there are significant safeguards around that law. But
it's very hard to manipulate someone into the voluntary assisted dying program, as has been evidenced by the scheme running very successfully in Victoria without one single case of that being reported, because there are so many checks and balances involved that it's inconceivable once you look at the detail. It's that's a separate issue, and we might be going down a bit of a side avenue there. Children may well try and push and apply pressure, that's absolutely right, but the scheme and the way the scheme is run and the checks and balances, it doesn't matter what the children's intentions are, they will not be able to pressure a person into dying against their will. There is absolutely no evidence for that in Victoria as the scheme has been running. Can I go to the lady at the back?
The threshold for police to take out an AVO is quite low. However, when it gets to court, it's a bit higher. It's on the balance of probability. So a magistrate pretty much has to determine that maybe 51%, yes, this is the case. Okay, but the vulnerability of the person is definitely looked at by the police in the application stage and by the court. So yes, there's AVOs that go to court that don't get finalised. Our thing is that immediate intervention to give that level of safety and protection to that person in need of protection. Hopefully, by the time it proceeds through the court, if the evidence is thin, and we are an evidence-based organisation and the courts are evidence-based, and there is insufficient evidence, yes, it may not proceed. But hopefully that window of opportunity is there for the other agencies to come in, okay? That's why we've set up the Safer Pathways referral program, so that's mandatory that will happen, and hopefully, and I'm sure there's occasions where people don't take up the offers of assistance, but we hope that they're encouraged and that they do take up those offers, because the police and AVOs aren't always the best pathway for safety to people, okay? There are other options.
And legal aid, one of those interventions that we often get requested for is, how do I get, I don't want my adult child to live with me anymore, what do I do? So there is a process. Legal aid specifically identified this issue, and there's a brochure called Adult Children Living at Home, How to Get Them to Leave. Uh, that's how I guess it's how frequent the issue comes to the table. So there is a process. If you don't want to take out an AVO but you would like your adult child to leave the home, there is assistance out there as well.
I'm so pleased that you've been able to make us laugh at that point. I mean, again, it's not funny, but it is kind of funny when you put it that way. And I should also mention, for those of you that don't know, that a lot of the banks have produced publications about financial elder abuse. We haven't really touched on that today because we're talking more about Marguerite's story and about physical abuse and about her kind of guilt about feeling dependent and not wanting to push her son out. But the Commonwealth Bank took the lead on this, and they did a lot of very good research, and they produced a publication which I think now all the other banks have rolled out. So if you have any concerns about financial elder abuse and how to put safeguards in place on things like your accounts, it's really, really important that you ask your bank for more information. Of course, they've got quite a lot of literature online, so that would be the place to start. We've come to the end of the sort of formal... Oh, sorry. No, we haven't.
It's
Nicole.
hard to see you down there, Caroline. Sorry, I just wanted to take the opportunity to flag that our Inner West Region Elder Abuse Collaborative have been working on a resource. It's going to come very shortly and be released in the next month or two. And you'll probably be able to access it. We'll circulate it out to participants here if you would like, and through the libraries and local councils. It's going to be like a flip chart, and based on giving you information about healthy ageing, where to go to for support, so things like scams, who to call in terms of, what we've been talking about today, whether that be legal, the phone numbers for local health districts that you need to, for each area, police and so on. So it will have all the contacts and a little bit of information around, healthy ageing tips and how to keep yourself safe in the context of abuse of older people.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. Mary.
We've got some bags here from Canterbury Bankstown Council and Inner West Council, because we're part of the collaborative, with a little bit of information. But I also just wanted to give a shout out to Jane Masser, who's here, who's also works at Sydney Local Health, because apart from some of the My Aged Care services and other services that we're hearing about today, there's a lot of support and groups and I mean, you're sitting in the Older Women's Network, who have a theatre group that we're going to meet later, and there's lots of programs and support in the community generally that you can access. And Jane runs a Get Connected, Stay Connected social connection group, for example, to get you out and to meet other people. Just to let you know that, and you can always ring us and ask about that.
I was just going to say that being connected is a very protective thing to do. So we've talked about this, Sharita's talked about it, other people have talked about it. That's why I run these social connections groups, because the more connections you have and the more groups you're in, the better this is for your protection. And the other thing I wanted to let people know about is a campaign called Every Age Counts, because a lot of these things come down to older people not having enough human rights. And there's a fantastic campaign. You can Google it, Every Age Counts. They're looking for your signature to support taking things on an international level, to get Australia to be part of a move to improve the rights of older people. And the Every Age Counts campaign also has a little quiz you can do to test yourself on how ageist are you, because even though we all try not to be, we all imbibe these ageist kind of views, and it's hard not to have them. So it's good to do the quiz on the Every Age Counts website.
Yeah, I'll second that, Jane. I've done the quiz, I've signed, I've taken the pledge. It's a really good campaign. And as you say, ageism is just one of those unconscious biases that we carry around with us. Even when we don't want to have it, we seem to have it. So thank you very much for pointing that out. Is there anyone who's itching to say something that they feel hasn't been covered off before we go to the next stage of the morning? So is everybody happy with what they've said so far? Yes? Anybody else in the audience who hasn't already asked a question, who would like to ask a question? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Sydney Local Health District, we have a domestic and family violence counselling service. So if you were to access Local Health District for other supports, so come into the hospital, for instance, be seen by one of the aged health care and rehab programs, a physio OT, you could be referred to that program as an older person. And so they're doing a lot of that case management and counselling work around, sitting with them, working out, providing emotional support and psychological support, but also that space to get to the place of maybe never wanting to take action, but sitting, supporting them through the experience of being a victim of violence. In addition to that, we also have case management service that is working towards keeping people out of hospital. Part of the work that they do is, the aspects of the guardianship, the assessment, the case management around abuse of older people. And also complex family dynamics, so working through that. And I just I almost added a comment before, but I just wanted to say that I can hear some anxiety out there about being believed. And that, family members are going to come forward and they're going to, tell different versions of stories, and I'm not going to be believed. And that's really a tactic that an abuser or family can use to keep you quiet as a victim. So I just wanted to assure you that you will be heard. So we will be working with you directly whilst we use a family approach in health. We will be using a client-directed approach, so you'll be at the centre of that. Any decision making, whether you have capacity or not, would be at the centre of the work that we do.
I know Chris wants to add to that, but just as a reminder, just as a follow-up from what Nicole said, one of the most confidential spaces that many of us have access to, where there's should be hopefully a high level of trust, is even before you get to the hospital stage, your GP. Your GP is often a really fantastic first port of call for all sorts of things. It doesn't have to be about something physical, but it can also be something physical. It can be that you've got a bruise mark from being pinched repeatedly on the arm by a relative who's insisting on something and hurting you. So I would urge you to remember that your GP, if you are lucky enough to have a relationship with the GP, is a good place to start. Chris, you wanted to say something. Nicole, you want to say something else?
Sorry, I just realised I didn't finish answering the question around safety planning. So all health workers would be looking at that as an approach. So working with you to build a plan that keeps you safe and prevents further risk of harm.
I just wanted to add, Seniors' Rights is the New South Wales arm of the national organisation called the Older Persons Advocacy Network. And out of the Royal Commission has become funding, and our service has increased from, I think, 8 advocates around the state to is going to be 40 when we're fully recruited, and plus various other positions as well. And the aim is to get into every single aged care facility to talk to residents and talk to staff, primarily around the whole awareness raising of rights. And I guess the other bit is linking into the isolation thing that Jane was talking of. There's a lot of talk going on about different models of care, and we know that residential aged care as it stands at the moment is probably, it's not a fantastic model, and there's a lot of issues. And that isolation, people can be isolated even though they're living in a 160-bed facility, or people can be isolated at home in a large family, but there's not much other contact outside that family, particularly when the family we keep all our secrets in the family. So I guess trying to open things up in terms of education, in terms of isolation, is certainly one of our focuses at Seniors' Rights and of course OPAN at the top.
Thank you. Now, one final closing remark from Kerry.
If you have concerns for yourself or a family member or a friend and you wish to call the Ageing and Disability Commission, I want you to know that we It is actually an offence for us to share your identity as the reporter to our agency without your consent, unless it's reporting a criminal offence. So if you call me or our service and say, I do not provide consent, I cannot share any information with anybody about your name or provide any information that may enable another agency or person to deduce who you are from the information I provide. So know that we're a safe service to call and we'll be working with you.
Thank you. That's a great place on which to end the conversation. I hope that you're all feeling much more informed. Feeling informed should lead you to feeling much safer. Can I ask you to thank the panel for this very informative session? Thank you. Thank you all. And can I ask the panel now, as you leave, can you take a chair with you, because we're going to clear the space. No, we're not going to clear the space. Forget that. Disregard that. If you just get up and leave. But I'm going to call Jo from the Older Women's Network Theatre Group, who's going to come and tell us about what is coming next. Jo, would you like to come forward? Now, Jo, we are going to hear 3 songs, I think. So perhaps you'd like to tell us about what comes next.
Okay.
And after that, you'll be getting some lunch.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm really here to explain to you what we're about, but I'm also covering time to get the space ready so that we can actually perform. First of all, I would really love to thank the panel, because we've been working in this arena for well over 10 years. My name is Jo Carl, and I work as a professional theatre director, and I worked as an actor and a performer, and the Older Women's Network Theatre Group approached me well over 10 years ago, and I remember this was the hardest question that I'm going to just keep moving so they can clean up behind me. The hardest question was asked of me to write with them a show about elder abuse. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is such a dark topic. How do I do this without it becoming, didactic, depressing, scary, all of those things? It was quite the challenge. And we all sat down around the table, and the Older Women's Network Theatre Group are an incredibly inclusive and wonderfully diverse group of women who come from the Older Women's Network, whom I can't praise enough for making connectivity for women, particularly older women, in our society. So we got together and we wrote a show, and we called it Don't Knock Your Granny. And it's actually highly entertaining and funny. And there are moments where you cry, and there are moments where your heart breaks. But I think that the important thing to know about that show is that we were focusing, because we were older women, and our ages range from 63 to 91. And we have that age group here today performing for you. Not our whole group is here today. But we travelled the world with our show. We went to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. We went to the Adelaide Festival. We did the festival at the Griffin Theatre in Sydney. We've travelled all over Australia to regional areas. And our focus, and I love to hear some of the things that were said today, our focus is about making the world a better place. Our focus is you're hearing it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, because we are older women. Many of our women have suffered from all kinds of ageism and abuse, whether it be sexual, financial, emotional, psychological, all of those. We cover all of it in our show. We did that show for about 10 years, and it was a huge hit. And it's my dream, and all of you important people who are here today, my dream is to take our show to young people. We will not change what's happening in our society without educating our young people. I want to take this show to the kids in school, to the universities, to corporate functions. I want to take it to TAFE, and I want not to preach to the converted, which I'm sure you all are, but I want to open their minds and their hearts about the plight of older people, and in our case, older women in society, because homelessness amongst older women, as we know, is just rampant. So what we do is we take our shows on the road and we educate people. And I think we're almost ready to go. I've got my lovely team behind me. And we're going to do only 3 songs from our new show. We've written a new show during COVID. COVID was very hard on the theatre group. We all had to learn to Zoom, which we did. And we wrote a new show. The new show is called We're Not Dead Yet. And it's actually about being ageing activists. And we're going to do 3 songs for you today, but we do a 1-hour show, we do a half-hour show, we do a 20-minute show, and we want to spread our message to the whole wide world about being an older person doesn't mean you're dead. You've got plenty of energy and plenty to say. So I will hand it over now to my wonderful, wonderful group of women who might be a bit stiff because they've been sitting still for half an hour. Please put your hands together for the Older Women's Network Theatre Group.
Young ladies, are you ready? Yeah! Woo-hoo! Here we go! Raging, 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 raging. Raging rhymes with raging, and this rock is what we're staging. So listen up and touch her and join in with our show. Raging, 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 raging. We're still alive and kicking. Alive and kicking. The horses keep on ticking. Kaboom, kaboom, kaboom. To the clock that's winding down. Cheek, cheek, cheek. As our assets stay abound. So bend your knees as how you please. And swingers on the high, high, high. There are no rules except be cool, cool, baby. And clap as balls to die. 'Cause we just got the rhythm of fantastic older women. And we're sick of being told life is over when you're old. Old, 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 old.
A person's age is the least interesting part of them.
Old, 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 old.
Once I was young and beautiful, now I'm just beautiful.
Old, 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 old.
When I grow up, cancel that. Don't plan on growing up.
Old, 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 old.
Oh, and younger than Mick Jagger.
I can't get no satisfaction. So bend your knees just how you please and swingers on the high. There are no rules except be cool and clap us before we die. 'Cause we just got the rhythm of fantastic older women, and we're sick of being told life is over when you're old.
I get up each day and dust off my wits. I pick up the paper and I read the obits. If my name is still missing, I know I'm not dead, so I have a good breakfast and go back to bed. Come on, everyone!
Society keeps telling us we're past our use-by date. Women over 45 are treated second rate. We're here to let you know that every oldie is of worth. We love to fight for what is right and give our ideas birth. We're not dead, that's what we say. We're not dead, not yet. Forever
you, thank you, thank you. That was fabulous. Now, there's an evaluation form which I think is being passed around, which we would love you to fill out to tell us how we did today. And you will be pleased to know that lunch is served and is available at the back. Thank you all for coming. And we hope to see you again when we do this again. Thank you.